So we're starting today with question 5, whether to eliminate the state's tipped minimum wage model and require employers to directly cover the full minimum wage for all tip workers by 2029. Under current law, tip workers are paid a minimum of $6.75 an hour. If tips don't get them to the minimum wage for all other workers, that's $15 in Massachusetts, the employer must make up the difference. A yes vote on question 5 would gradually increase the minimum wage of tip workers until it meets the state's full minimum wage, as I said, by 2029. Tip workers would still be allowed to collect tips, but the employer could choose to pool and share the tips with cooks and others who don't interact directly with customers. A no vote on question 5 would keep the current tipped wage system in place. Joining us in Studio 3 for the yes side is Alex Galimberti. He's founder of One Fair Wage Massachusetts chapter and a former restaurant worker himself. Alex, it's great to have you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
For the no side, Doug Bacon is head of Red Paint Hospitality. He owns a bunch of restaurants. He's here on behalf of the Committee to Protect Tips, and he too is a former restaurant worker. Alex, Doug, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it.
Happy to be here.
So let's start with you, Alex. Why is this a good idea?
Thanks, Marjorie, and thanks, Jim, for having me
Sure.
here. So why is this a good idea? This is a good idea because question 5 would undo a system that is a legacy of slavery. The reason why there are certain sectors of the worker population that are excluded from the minimum wage is a legacy of slavery. It's workers in agriculture, workers in the service industry who do not get paid a minimum wage. So these exclusions created a system of inequity, a system that works for the very few, but the majority of workers that are working under this system are struggling, are not making a living wage, are having to rely on benefits. So while this works for the workers that are earning tips at the very top segment of the industry, while this works for restaurant business employers, a lot of workers are hurting. And this is very personal to me because we started this campaign actually 11 years ago when I was a restaurant worker here in Massachusetts. And it just didn't make sense to me why, as a restaurant worker in the state of Massachusetts, my employer could pay me $2.63 an hour at the time. Why we, as a professional category, were excluded from making a full minimum wage. And how come 7 states in the country get perfectly fine and have a robust restaurant industry without allowing such a system?
Okay, let's hold it there, Alex, if we can. So we just focus on the core arguments. Doug, you can respond to any of that you choose, but in addition, tell us why a no vote is the correct vote.
So first of all, the argument about slavery is entirely bogus. It's been disproven multiple times. Further, there is no sub-minimum wage in Massachusetts. Everyone is guaranteed under law to make $15 an hour or more. This proposal had been 100% funded by a group of activists from California. They spent $900,000, all money that was raised out of state, to put this on the ballot to suggest and propose that they know better how the industry should operate. If this were to pass, it would be a disaster for Massachusetts. It's bad for tipped employees. Servers and bartenders do not want this. They are not asking for it. In fact, they are actively protesting for no on question 5. It's very bad for small business owners. Many restaurants will close. We will be left with nothing but fast food and fine dining with nothing in the middle. Affordable restaurants will disappear. And lastly, for consumers, the most important issue that you hear from consumers today is rising prices, the cost of living, food, rent, fuel, insurance. Menu prices will go up dramatically. When this is fully implemented, if it were to pass, menu prices will go up 25 to 30% everywhere.
Okay, let's hold it there. Alex, for the yes side, in addition to responding to anything Doug had to say, particularly when you said you're not guaranteed a full minimum wage, my understanding is the law as it exists now says if you don't hit $15, combining $6.75 tip minimum wage and your tips, then the employer is required by law to raise you to 15. So there is a de facto $15 minimum wage for restaurant workers, is there not?
In paper, yes, but the reality that restaurant workers experience throughout Massachusetts and throughout the country is that the restaurant industry is one of the largest offenders of wage theft. I experienced that as a restaurant worker. I've witnessed many of my coworkers experiencing wage theft. And the way that this takes place, especially in a system with a sub-minimum wage, where it is oftentimes the onus of the worker to make sure that our tips are enough to bring us to the minimum wage and then bring it to the attention of the employer to make sure that they supplement it. Oftentimes those things fall through the crack, or sometimes there are employers that are taking advantage of this system and blatantly committing wage theft. There was a study by the U.S. Department of Labor under the Obama administration. They did a survey of the restaurant industry, and they documented 84% non-compliance of making the tip credit, which is assuring that workers are making the minimum wage. The Solicitor General of the DOL at the time, Patricia Smith, she declared that it was unenforceable for the DOL to go after all these employers that were non-compliant.
Let's stay on that's an important issue. How about that, Doug?
It's a bogus argument. The statistics that he is citing are for all 50 states. We live in a high enforcement environment in Massachusetts. The administration and other administrations have been very supportive of labor violation enforcement. In fact, restaurants would pay 3 times triple damages if they were found to be in violation of any of these laws engaging in wage theft. And there may be some cases where the activists can cite an example of someone who was not paid appropriately. It's far and away the exception. The vast majority of people who work for tips in Massachusetts are fairly compensated and, in fact, earn far in excess of minimum wage. I know because I was a tip worker for more than 10 years, and this business is not for everyone. It's not for everyone. Servers and bartenders work very hard. And some people don't do well with it. They can't handle the stress, the pressure, dealing with the public, and they tend to leave the business. The people who thrive and survive and deliver great hospitality tend to do well. They move up in seniority. They get better shifts. They make more money. The servers, and it's like a synergy between the guests and the servers.
Let me just say that is Doug Bacon. He wants you to vote no on question 5. Alex Galimberti is here urging you to vote yes.
Yeah, and I
so
wish that Doug was right on what he's saying, but
I am right.
unfortunately, the rates of wage theft are also high here in Massachusetts. It is something that the Fair Labor Division of the Attorney General really struggles to keep a grasp on. Here in Massachusetts, about 5.6% of the worker population are tipped restaurant workers. But the rate of complaints that the Attorney General offices get of wage theft cases are 13.9% coming from the restaurant industry. And most of those complaints regard tips. Now, these are the workers that are brave enough to come forward and complain about wage theft. But in an industry that employs an overwhelming majority of immigrant workers, people that are afraid of bringing forward complaints, a lot of these complaints go unreported.
But one other thing, we've all been service here for many years. I have too for many years, and you have obviously.
Don't leave me out, Marjorie.
Yeah, you were at the Catskills there.
I was in the
with
Catskills.
all
I
the
was.
vacationers. But one of the things that I know, because there is a lot of hustle involving it with waiting tables, and you can be a really good server, and you can make a ton of money. Yeah. And I think if you're a really good server that's counting on that, and a lot of single moms do this as a way to support their life with those restaurant hours and stuff, and you get somebody next to you that's really kind of screwing up, it would drive me, I think, a little bit insane that I'm working 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 tables, and they're kind of goofing up next to me, and I'm getting the same amount as they are.
Well, that's not true though, Marjorie, because this law would not require tip pooling. Tip pooling is when the tips are shared evenly amongst all servers. That is not a requirement of this bill. And also sharing.
But that's something that people are talking a lot about. Is
yes,
sharing
because
them with
that
the
is an
back of the
option.
house
The
And
activists
unfortunately,
are actually encouraging tip pooling. And if you can see, Saru Jayarman, who is the founder of One Fair Wage, not only encourages it, she says it's going to happen.
Well, if we can be clear, we're going to do a
happens.
little fact checking, unlike what CNN did in the first debate. It's not required
It's not
by the law
required.
should this become a yes.
But
correct?
the economics of having to pay an increased wage to front-of-the-house servers and bartenders likely would require restaurant operators to share the tips with back-of-the-house people, dishwashers, line cooks, possibly cleaning people, maybe even the bookkeeper in the office.
Well,
Well,
does your
unfortunately-
group support that? Would you like to see the wages pooled and shared?
Well, so this is something that is very important about this bill. This bill gives the option of
But what is your
sharing
group?
the
What does your
tips.
group support?
Well, the option means that each business would make their own decision, and the workers are entitled to be involved in the decision. Now, what the opposition is saying, which is very unfortunate that they're relying on a campaign of misinformation, is that this bill would demand tip sharing. This is
No,
not true.
that's
that this
not true.
bill would make tipping averages.
Where does
go
it say that
low.
the workers are involved in the decision making about sharing the tips in this?
It's in
They
law.
are not.
48
It's in
states.
Section 5 of this proposal, and the activists are not even aware. It's in Section 5 of this proposal that the owners will have control of the tips if this were to pass and can enforce a tip pool. The irony is,
Why are you against? By the way, you're an owner.
I'm an owner
So
because
if you don't,
I
but
worked
Doug,
for
if you
10
don't like
years.
it, don't share the tips.
No,
Exactly,
I worked for
that's
10
the option
years
of the business.
as a server and a bartender, and I'm offended by the idea that you go into a restaurant as a consumer, and someone hustles and smiles and talks to you about the food and the options, and then if this were to pass, it's likely that your tip would not only go to the people in the front of the house, but in fact be shared with people that you have no interaction
But you could
with.
stop that. You're the individual
Yes.
owner could say
But
no.
hold
to
on,
it.
And the
Economics.
workers can
I just want to
stop
be
that
clear
as
on
well.
one thing, though. I know you say it's the option of the employees, but where
Correct.
is one fair wage on this? Are you in favor of this? Is that something you think would be a good idea?
We
or
are in
not?
favor of the layers of equity that this
Okay,
bill
so you're in
would
favor
brought
of
about.
pooling.
And the
That's
way
right.
that this would bring equity is that it will bring equity among states. There are only 2 states in the country where currently it's forbidden to do tip sharing with the back of house, and that's New York and Massachusetts. In all other 48 states, whenever all workers are making a full minimum wage, the workers themselves can decide on a tip sharing system that would include their back of house, their kitchen
That's
colleagues.
not true.
So
the
that
servers
a
would
line
not
cook-
decide.
Don't
It's in
talk over
Section
them. Let
5
it-
of the
let-
proposal.
Can I, Doug? I want to ask you about a comment you made before. You said, should this go into effect, restaurants would close, prices have to go up, etc.
That's right.
We had Evan Horowitz here, who did these wonderful analyses at the Center for State Policy Analysis on all 5 questions, part of Tufts. Here's what he wrote about these 7 other states, and now specifically the District of Columbia that just did this 2 years ago. Quote,
Which it's been a disaster.
Let me read what Evan, who is a neutral in this, says. Not enough time has passed to really assess the economic impact in Washington, meaning D.C., but early numbers do not show any obvious problems on the job front. There's somewhat fewer bartenders, an increase in waiters and waitresses, and earnings that are broadly consistent with recent years. What do you say to them?
That's not the data that I've seen, and I have seen reporting both in the media and by some think tanks that have done research into what has happened in D.C. And what I've seen is they've already lost 10% of full-service restaurant jobs.
I think that this is something that is unfortunately a misrepresentation, and I would like to see the opposition point to scientific data, because there's no data out there showing that states that have one fair wage plus tips, a full minimum wage for restaurant workers, have hurt in the employment sector.
But Alex, okay, so speaking of the 7 other states, my
Yeah.
understanding is, and this is beyond dispute, it's been decades until Washington, D.C., decades since any state joined those 7 states with a full minimum wage, which is what you're proposing. If it's such a good idea, why did no other states in decades and decades decide to do what you're hoping to do here?
Thanks for bringing this up, Jim. I think that when Doug is saying that this is a campaign led by people from out of state, I'm here to attest that we started this campaign myself with a group of restaurant workers over 10 years ago here in Massachusetts. But what the opposition doesn't want to say is that all of their talking points and all of their strategy is coming from Washington, D.C., is coming from the National Restaurant Association, a lobby group that has had a tight grasp on putting a lock on no raises to the
We
tip
have
minimum wage
raised-
at the
Wait, wait,
federal
Doug,
level
if you can,
and
just
at the
finish, and then
state
you're-
level. And that is why we actually resorted to coming to the ballot, because 10 years ago we started campaigning for this at the legislature. But the Restaurant Association knows very well, and they spend a lot of money on this, that all you need to do at the State House here in Massachusetts is sway the Speaker of the House, sway a chair committee, and a bill dies in
Okay,
committee and doesn't
okay,
come
the-
to
Can't
vote.
Doug, you want to
argue with that.
respond?
Yes, the reality
Doug, you
is
wanna respond?
our elected officials realize what a terrible idea this was and how much destruction it will cause. Affordable restaurants will disappear. We will have fast food is completely unaffected by this. High-end dining, like the Capitol Grill, if you're going there to have a steak for $70, maybe it will go up $5. But if you're in one of my affordable restaurants and you want to have a burger for $15 and now it's $20, affordable restaurants will be wiped out in every city and town and main streets. And our elected officials realize what a bad idea this is. That's why they couldn't get through with this crazy idea from California. The reality is, it will destroy affordable restaurants in Massachusetts, and the activists are pushing for it with no support from servers and bartenders in Massachusetts. They can line up 2 or 3 people. We have hundreds and hundreds of people who are standing out at rallies, holding signs, contributing to our campaign. All you have to do is ask a server or bartender in your local restaurant. This will
Let's
be
stop.
devastating.
That's really important. How about that, Alex? In terms of the servers, bartenders themselves, where are they on this?
Well, I think, when the restaurant owners have a captive audience and they tell their employees that a yes on 5 will cause them to lose tips, to lose their hours, when there's no evidence pointing to, of course, their workers will be afraid. Their workers will be intimidated. We have heard in our campaign that there are restaurants that are forcing their employees to wear no on 5 buttons. And this is really problematic. But these are the strategies that the opposition is adopting when we have a grassroots coalition that is consisting of restaurant workers, restaurant business owners, civil rights and workers' rights activists that are campaigning for this because we know that this will create more equity and make living wages possible for workers across the entire sector and not only the 1% of the high-end restaurants.
You could argue, too, as Alex no doubt has, that if you're paying the back of the house people a minimum wage, why not pay the front of the house people minimum wage? I mean, there's an inequity there.
You can have an argument about that, but the servers and bartenders want to work for tips. The people who hustle and deliver great hospitality in Massachusetts, they are very well compensated. For me, this is a feature of our industry. This is how it works great. And I was a server and a bartender for more than 10 years. So when I hustled and I worked hard and I had a busy shift, I would make great money. And this is what attracts the best people to our industry to work in the front of the house. If we change this system, pay everyone minimum wage and share the tips, you will get the same level of service that you get at CVS or Walmart or Target.
Well,
So,
there's
sorry,
the
Alex,
misinformation
that.
again.
Alex,
I
go
think
ahead.
Nobody wants that.
I mean, have you ever gone to a restaurant in California and received terrible service? Or
Yes.
a restaurant in Washington State, in Seattle, or in
Yeah.
Minnesota?
I never go anywhere, Alex, so I had
I
to
feel
stay
I
local.
feel like the
Massachusetts
tipping
is a unique
culture
place.
that we have
We don't want to be
is
California.
Wait.
it's a national thing.
Do you worry, though, that people are going to tip less? I mean,
No, I don't.
Why not?
Because when we were collecting signatures for this ballot, the vast majority of voters that signed to put this on the ballot, when we explained to them the issue, they had absolutely no clue.
Okay, another
that
question.
Restaurant workers were making
Even if you don't think
$6.75 an
tips
hour.
will decline, do you agree that the cost to the owner of a restaurant is going to go up?
Slightly,
Okay,
yes.
and what do they do to defray those costs? What would you recommend they do to defray those costs?
The same thing that successful restaurant business owners such as Doug always do. When his rent goes up, does he have a way to stop that? When the price of gas goes up, restaurant owners are resilient and they know how to do this. And that's why this law is written in a way that is a gradual implementation. It is a slow phase in that restaurant businesses can adapt. And Doug, you raising the price of your hamburger by $5 by $5 over 1 year, that's price gouging, man. This increase would require, if a restaurant to increase their menu prices by 10% over 5 years. So if you're phasing it in, that is much less than that every year of this implementation.
I just want to reintroduce you guys so people know what we're talking about. We're talking about question 5. That's the question on the ballot, debating the minimum wage for tip workers. That's what you're going to be deciding in the November election. We're speaking with Alex Galimberti. He's the founder of the organization's Massachusetts chapter and a former restaurant worker
One Fair Wage.
who wants, One Fair Wage, who wants to change this. He's representing Yes on 5, and Doug Bacon, head of the Red Paint Hospitality on behalf of the Committee to Protect Tips, representing No on question 5. Alex, I wonder, Jim and I were talking about this before you came on. Lately, I think post the pandemic, you've been seeing certain service charges on your bills. And some, if they're a big party, they're a lot. Maybe they're a smaller party, they're something. But I think the customer looks at that and sees there's a 5%, 10%, 18%, and they're going to tip less. Where does the service charge
100% they will.
fit in here?
Yeah, I think that is a problem. That the mandatory fees that some businesses are charging across sectors. Of course, it's not only the restaurant industry, but it's become an endemic problem. Right? You go anywhere and there's fees, and this is something that was one of the biggest disruptors in the implementation of one for wage plus tips in DC. It's because the Restaurant Association cooked up an idea to put mandatory surcharges so they could make up the difference. So then when there is a surcharge on your check, when you're dining at a restaurant in Washington, D.C., once this implementation started and the surcharge is 20%, customers were assuming that was the tip. But that was not the tip. That was the restaurant making up the difference of the higher wage that they were having to pay. And the Attorney General in Washington, D.C. had to crack down on this and pass a rule mandating that any fees that a restaurant or other businesses put on their check has to be clearly explaining what that fee is going to
But we're
towards.
seeing those
Transparency in
in
fees.
Massachusetts, where the wage is not, the minimum wage has not gone up yet. So
Correct.
why
So
are we
the
seeing
federal
here?
government is also looking at the widespread implementation of fees, and the fees that the restaurant industry is putting on checks is going into the widespread investigation by the Federal Trade Commission on bogus fees. Right? Biden has
Hold
a
it.
campaign
What
against
about
You
the
wanna
bogus
respond to
yeah,
this,
what about
Go
those
ahead.
fees?
Sure. So in DC, there was a dramatic increase in labor costs. Operators are trying to figure out how to make it work. And in some cases, they've added on a service fee. And consumers are saying, well, now there's a service fee. I'm not going to tip. Here's the other thing. And you see this all over message boards, Reddit, comments in the newspaper articles. Consumers are saying, oh, now servers might get paid minimum wage. That's great because I hate tipping and I'm not going to tip anymore. So consumers are already saying they're going to stop tipping or they're going to change their tipping behavior if the wages go up, the menu prices go up, and service fees are added. Bartenders and servers do not want this system to change. They're very well compensated. Under the model that we have, they hustle, they work hard, they deserve it. It's not an easy job, and it's not for everyone. So I think the system works great as it is. I'm able to retain people. I have people who work for tips who've worked for me for more than 20 years. They've raised their families, they've bought homes, they've thrived, and they want to see this system stay the way it is so that they can continue to
You have a
thrive.
lot of regular customers, I'm guessing?
Tons.
And a regular customer who comes to your one of your restaurants on a regular basis knows that Jane or John is their server. All of a sudden, starting January, they're going to not tip that person anymore because they read in the paper that there's now by 2029 there's going to be a $15 minimum wage rather than a $6.75 minimum wage.
That's a fair point. Some of those customers may continue to tip the same way, but many consumers will not. And the regular customers, I think you're right. Some of the regular customers will continue to tip the same way, but all of my customers are not regulars. In fact, I have 5 locations just in the neighborhoods of Allston and Brighton. And we have people coming and going, and we have a lot of regulars. But over time, prices will go up, consumers will become aware, and behavior will change. We know that's a fact.
Okay,
I think
so
that's a
I'm sorry,
scare
Alex, go ahead.
tactic because saying that tips will go away is just something that there's no evidence towards. Customers are not tipping less in Washington, D.C., and they do not tip less in the 7 states that have one for wage. And I don't know any customer that asks to their server, how much do you make an hour before deciding how much they're going to tip? Do you calculate that you're going to tip differently if you're in a different state? And the numbers show that the average tipping rates in states that have a full minimum wage are oftentimes higher than in states like Massachusetts.
Okay, let me hold you there. Gentlemen, why don't you take each, starting with you, Doug, take 30, 45 seconds, sort of wrapping up what you
Sure.
think the primary reasons why people should vote no are, and then Alex will ask you to do the same for vote yes, please.
Everyone should absolutely vote no on question 5, and here's why. Local neighborhood affordable restaurants will be devastated by this. We don't just compete with other restaurants. We compete with grocery stores, takeout places, DoorDash, Uber Eats. We compete with anywhere people can get food. When the prices go up, consumers look for alternatives. Our sales will go down, costs will go up, the middle of the industry will be wiped out. Every city and town will lose affordable restaurants. Please vote no on question 5. Servers and bartenders are not asking for this change.
Do you have a website, by the way?
I do.
What is? I don't mean you personally.
ProtectTips.org.
ProtectTips.org. Alex, if you have a website in your final thoughts, give us that too, please, if you would.
Yes, thank you. So the reason why the voting public in Massachusetts is widely supporting yes on 5 and why I urge the listeners to vote yes on 5 is because question 5 is important because it brings about fairness for workers. It gives it protects workers from economic instability, from the constant danger of sexual harassment and other forms of discrimination, and from wage theft. It is also fair for consumers because consumers are not going to be so much in charge of subsidizing the livelihoods of restaurant workers, not only through tips, but also through benefits that a lot of restaurant workers have to rely on. And it's also fair for employers. We have employers throughout the state that want to pay one fair wage and want to be able to share tips with the back of house, but they cannot do that at the moment, and they are put at a competitive disadvantage, so it would level the playing field to have one fair wage for tips. All
Okay.
industries have to pay a minimum wage, so should the restaurant industry.
What's your website?
And check yeson5ma.org.
Yeson5ma.org.
Yes.
Gentlemen, we thank you both. We really appreciate your time today, and hope people check out your websites and learn
Thank
a
you
lot
for the
before they vote.
opportunity.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for having
Thank you
us.
very